Good morning. I call this hearing to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. I would like to begin by noting some important requirements. Let me begin by saying that standing House and committee rules and practice will continue to apply during hybrid proceedings. All members are reminded that they are expected to adhere to these standing rules, including decorum. House regulations require members to be visible through a video connection throughout the proceeding, so please keep your cameras on. Also, remember to remain muted until you are recognized to minimize background noise. In the event a member encounters technical issues that prevent them from being recognized for their questioning, I will move to the next available member of the same party, and I will recognize that member at the next appropriate time slot, provided they have returned to the proceeding. For those members and staff physically present in the committee room today, in accordance with the attending physician's most recent guidance, all members and staff who attend this hybrid hearing in person will be required to wear masks in the hearing room. And now I will move to my opening statement. First, I would like to welcome Inspector General Ware. Thank you for being here today. Your work has been indispensable throughout the COVID crisis, and you should be proud of your efforts to improve programs critical to small businesses. The OIG's office is tasked with reporting on the top management and performance challenges facing the Small Business Administration every year. While this year's report covers many long-standing issues, it also calls attention to the biggest challenge facing the agency, the pandemic relief programs. Since 2020, the SBA has distributed nearly $1 trillion in economic relief to small firms. This figure surpasses the amount of money distributed in all other years of SBA existence combined. This is an enormous achievement and helped keep millions of small businesses afloat during the pandemic. However, with any emergency effort of this magnitude, problems will inevitably occur. According to investigations, the COVID EIDL and paycheck protection programs have been vulnerable to fraud. Much of this potential fraud can be traced back to the early days of the pandemic, when programs were new, loan volume was high, and the need to get the loans out quickly was the priority. Your report also notes that in 2020, the previous administration relaxed internal controls, adding significant stress to the system and creating an environment ripe for fraud. This committee has worked diligently to conduct oversight and institute legislative fixes to address these problems. We have conducted hearings, written letters, held briefings, and passed bills, ensuring money is going to small businesses that need it most and not the bad actors. Since taking office in January, the Biden administration has also demonstrated its commitment to rooting out fraud and abuse. Administrator Guzman inherited many open recommendations from the OIG. Under her leadership, the SBA has closed out 70 OIG recommendations this year alone. SBA took steps to shore up fraud protections in critical pandemic programs. This includes implementing a master review plan for loan and forgiveness applications in the PPP program and allowing the agency to hold funds at any time in the EIDL process. The agency now also ensures that all borrowers are not on the Treasury Department's do not pay list. These are just a few of the actions that help reduce fraud. So I look forward to continuing our work with the administration on this front. At the same time, the IG's reports cover other critical issues unrelated to pandemic relief. These include challenges in small business contracting, IT security, access to capital, and disaster assistance. Addressing these problems will require sustained work on a bipartisan basis from this committee. I hope that today's hearing allows us to take a close look at all of these issues and discuss bipartisan solutions to fix them. I now like to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Lukemeyer, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for calling today's hearing with Inspector Ware. Welcome, Inspector. Always good to have you before us to explain what's going on. Before I begin, I also want to thank the Chairman for the announced changes in the order in which members question witnesses. This is an important announcement. I am thankful for your action. Likewise, I know members will appreciate going back to regular order and the methods that were voted on within the rules package. Additionally, I'd like to take this time to recognize and congratulate the committee's Chief Counsel, Jan Oliver, on her upcoming retirement. Jan has been a stalwart for small businesses for years and has worked in public service for decades, from her time with now Senator Portman to working at the White House and to her time, her service to this committee. Her steady guidance and counsel for the past 31 years has always been welcomed by the several chairmen and many committee members that she has served. Jan, thank you for the thoughtful insight and analysis on all issues, including and especially those pertaining to regulations and its impact on small business. Thank you very much. Now, as we start the second session of the 117th Congress, it is critically important that we begin with a discussion on oversight. With roughly $1 trillion in assistance provided to the nation's smallest firms through the Small Business Administration, we must exercise our oversight responsibilities wisely and often. It isn't just dollars flowing to small businesses. There are new programs at the SBA that also require our attention. That is why I'm thankful we have today's conversation with Inspector General Ware. Congress moved quickly in the spring of 2020 to support the nation's economy with hundreds of billions of dollars for small businesses. Some of these programs, like the Paycheck Protection Program, which was driven by private sector lenders, focused heavily on the nation's workers. Other programs that were administered directly through the SBA moved slower and were overall less successful. Fraud took place and taxpayer dollars were and continue to be wasted. This is unacceptable. The numbers presented by the inspector are significant. While the IG reports approximately $4.6 billion in possible fraudulent activity within the Paycheck Protection Program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, also known as EIDL, is enmeshed in roughly $84 billion in potentially fraudulent activity. The PPP was administered by private sector financial institutions. The EIDL program was not. The SBA acted as the sole and only gatekeeper to the EIDL program. Identity theft, where businesses and individuals illegally entered the program, is a major problem for the EIDL program. Differences on how these programs were run cannot be overstated, and they should serve as case studies for future public policy debates on how the SBA should run its programs. Asking the SBA to expand or enhance their direct lending ability would be counter to the facts that we have on the ground. Beyond the COVID relief programs, we know that the SBA has struggled with identifying risks within their access to capital programs, overseeing their contracting programs, and updating and keeping pace with their information technology needs for years. The COVID emergency period has compounded all these programs and challenges for SBA. I always say that when you put something under stress, that's when you find out where your real problems are. And obviously with this COVID situation and the SBA taking on a tremendously increased workload, we now know where a lot of problems are. Due to the PPP and EIDL, more businesses know about the services and functions of SBA than ever. Therefore, the SBA must be ready to serve and assist small businesses, all the while protecting taxpayer dollars and preserving the integrity of the existing programs. Small business owners don't have time to waste. They are facing significant price increases and are having trouble finding workers. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. Supply chain issues continue to thwart their planning, and uncertainty surrounding a vaccine mandate is ever present. Now more than ever, the federal government programs cannot be duplicative, wasteful, or counterproductive. I look forward to hearing more from Inspector Ware on where fraud stands today with the COVID relief programs an update on all recommendations, and what programs his office will be examining next. With such a significant amount of potential fraud clogging the process for small businesses, I know the discussion will not end here. This will require ongoing efforts for years to come. With that, Madam Chair, I look forward to working with you this year, and I look forward to continuing work with the Inspector General. To that end, I want to give you this letter, which is a list, and we can give that to your staff. This letter, which is a list of some of the witnesses and topics that I think would be impactful for and helpful to us in our legislative and oversight work. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back and look forward to working with you this coming year.
Thank you, Mr. Lukemeyer. The gentleman yields back. With that, I will now introduce our distinguished witness, the Honorable Hannibal Mike Ware, Inspector General of the SBA. Mr. Ware was sworn in as the Inspector General in May 2018 and has been an effective leader in his role and an asset to this committee. He has nearly 30 years of experience in the OIG community, rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse in federal programs. Welcome, Mr. Ware. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and good morning. Good morning, Chairman Velasquez, Ranking Member Lutemeyer, and distinguished members of this committee. Thank you, as always, for inviting me to speak with you today and for your continued support of my office. It was my hope that my next appearance before this committee would occur with the pandemic in our rearview mirrors. However, the pandemic has been lasting with ever-changing challenges. SBA has played a pivotal and unprecedented role in stabilizing the U.S. economy. In doing so, the men and women of SBA who have been on the front lines and who have directly met the needs of millions of small businesses, they have sacrificed their time and worked long hours to implement these programs on an unprecedented scale. Not only do we as taxpayers thank them for their hard work, but there are countless whistleblowers who have come forward to my office to shine the light of transparency on matters that they believed were of concern to stewarding the taxpayers' dollars. We thank them not only for their hard work, but for their courage and sense of duty to the nation. The men and women of my office equally have been working diligently to provide oversight of SBA's pandemic response. We have never lost sight of the struggles of the small business owners and their employees who toil not only with financial hardship, but in many cases, personal loss as a result of the pandemic. We are keenly aware that nothing short of the public's trust is at stake in our oversight efforts. We have already issued 18 reports addressing SBA's pandemic efforts with dozens of recommendations for corrective action. Our investigative work to date has resulted in 366 indictments, 294 arrests, and 142 convictions related to EIDL or PPP. The monetary recoveries and savings from our oversight of SBA's pandemic response efforts in fiscal year 2021 alone were $4.2 billion, with Congress investing just $50 million in supplemental funds to facilitate our oversight efforts. And the work has really just begun. A significant portion of our supplemental funding will be exhausted by the end of fiscal year 2024, which will coincide with hundreds of billions of dollars in EIDL loans coming due for payment. We anticipate this will be a key moment for realizing the true scope of fraud in the program, which already is expansive. We believe our annual resource levels will need to be right-sized to match this fraud landscape and to provide necessary oversight of SBA's management challenges in the years beyond the pandemic response. Notwithstanding the challenge, OIG has sought opportunity to more effectively and efficiently carry out our mission. We have provided oversight in real time, producing reports in under 2 months. In doing so, the IG community took note and used our oversight model to develop an agile products toolkit for OIGs across government. The result of our innovation is that we proudly kept the Congress, the administrator, our stakeholders, and the public currently and fully informed of SBA's pandemic response efforts. I'm also happy to report that OIG is taking significant strides in leveraging data analytics to oversee these vast loan portfolios. We're moving from a reactive data analytics posture to leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to get in front of fraud and expand the reach of our oversight. In OIG's dealing with SBA's leaders throughout the pandemic, I have never had a reason to doubt their commitment to providing assistance to the nation's small businesses. In terms of characterization of SBA's response to our findings related to their pandemic response, it is my perspective that there were missed opportunities to recalibrate internal controls and implement corrective action in a timely manner at the outset of SBA's pandemic response efforts. This has since changed significantly as we work more closely to implement proper internal controls from the onset of new program startups. We are committed to providing independent and objective oversight of SBA's programs and operations. And in doing so, we'll continue to shine the light of transparency and work diligently to keep everyone informed. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have of me.
Thank you, Mr. Ware. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Ware, Administrator Guzman indicated that this administration is sincere in implementing the IG's recommendations and that SBA has made great strides in satisfying multiple recommendations. Is this administration cooperating with ongoing audits and investigation? And can you expand on your relationship with the administrator in resolving the IG's recommendations?
Yes, thank you for the question. I could say unequivocally that the leadership team at SBA currently is definitely taking recommendations seriously and moving quite quickly to resolve them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In your July briefing to the committee, you indicated that 15 recommendations made by the OIG related to PPP and COVID idle remained open. At this time, how many remain open?
At this time, I believe that number it could be 20. I could get back to you on the exact number. What I do know is that half of the number that remain open haven't quite come due yet to be closed. And that the date for another set of them passed just December 31st. And we may have the information on it, but we have not reconciled that information yet to give an update as to which ones can be closed.
Thank you. And speed was imperative at the beginning of the pandemic, leading to fraud controls being removed. The current administration put guardrails back in place to prevent further fraud and abuse. Has your office evaluated whether any of the new safeguards are achieving their intended goals, since most of the audits and investigations have focused on the performance of the PPP and COVID idle programs under the previous administration?
So there's a few ways to look at that. To answer the question directly, we are in the process of reviewing those. And as a matter of fact, 2 reports should be out addressing those questions more directly within the next 30 days, I believe. I hope, right? That's what we're looking at. But I could tell you this, what was done differently in terms of this leadership team was an upfront focus on the internal control environment that included an actual sitting down to determine what was best to be put in place prior to setting anything else up.
Thank you. Mr. Ware, Congress created the COVID idle program to provide quick working capital to small businesses suffering economic injury due to COVID-19 pandemic. So in creating this program, Congress acknowledged the private sector will struggle to deliver relief funds to small dollar borrowers quickly. Given the COVID idle emphasis on the fast delivery of funds and the approach the private sector took to focus on larger businesses and existing clients with PPP, do you believe it is fair and appropriate to compare COVID idle to 7A loan program?
Being that they're 2 totally, completely different animals, it's difficult based on the evidence that we have to make a comparison of the 2 in terms of how delivery is. Certainly, the body of work definitely says that the direct lending programs have had issues in terms of a fraud environment, but so has the 7A program as well. We have our own issues with them. To make a comparison of the two when speaking about direct lending, I don't believe that we have a body of work that can make that, because there's so many different aspects that have to be considered. And we are focused primarily based on fraud risk.
Okay, so is it fair to compare new direct lending program to the COVID idle, given the stark differences and goals in the two programs?
I believe that a whole lot of angles have to be considered if you're going to do a comparison. From an inspector general perspective, from my perspective, either way, there's the control environment that will tell the tale. A proper control environment could.
My time has expired.
A lot of the issues that we have seen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. And now I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Lukemeyer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, welcome, Inspector. Good to see you again. I'd like to start today by discussing some of the numbers that your report's identified when it comes to fraud. In total, it looks like there's approximately $80 billion in potential fraudulent idle activity, and there's $4.6 billion in potentially fraudulent activity within the PPP. These two programs have different mechanics, as you've just described. But I think contrary to the point of the chairman, that there is some similarities here in that they are direct lending programs, money going out the door, but they were done in a different fashion from the standpoint that the PPP had the private sector, the banks, credit unions, and some fintech folks delivering those funds versus SBA and their folks delivering that. And so I think the difference there, correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is my question. It would appear to me that the rules, regulations, processes, procedures, controls were not followed by the SBA folks when it comes to the idle program and some of the other direct programs, 7A programs that they implement versus the banks and credit unions who have know your customer rules in place, laws in place that minimized. When you look at $4.6 billion in PPP, that's roughly 5% fraud rate. $80 billion is over 30% fraud rate in the idle program. That is a significant difference between the two, and I think there's a significant difference in the way that they were adjudicated by the SBA. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that the 7A program in dealing with the lenders meant that they had more of a relationship, and they were able to let us know from the onset where the issues were and to work with us to call back a whole lot of the money. In terms of idle oversight, initially, with the focus being solely on speed, initially, and guardrails being lowered, it is just that was the reason. That was the reason that we ended up with what we have.
Okay, so it begs the question then: if have the guardrails been put back up?
Have they? That's what you're asking me?
Yeah, I mean, you said that the problem with the fraud was the guardrails were taken off. Have they been put back up?
Yeah. Yes, many of the guardrails have, and many of our recommendations to that regard have been put in place. So
I'm going to follow up with regards to the PPP. We've had this discussion before, and we've found that a lot of the fraud that was in the PPP program was in the fintech folks. They didn't have the know your customer law in place that the banks and credit unions do, or the banks to have in place, and didn't really take the precautions to make sure that those dollars were actually going to a real person and that this wasn't a duplicative action on the part of the borrower. And so you were telling me in earlier conversations and your other reports that the fintechs were really kind of the problem children here. Have you seen that continue to be the situation? Do you see something different now, or where are we at with this?
What I told you at the time was that our investigative work was finding that where we were seeing the most fraud, and in terms of our arrest, convictions, indictments, and everything else, there was a great deal of a percentage of those that had to do with fintechs. Not saying that if the proper control environment is in place, that would be the case, but that is what the evidence demonstrated.
Okay, I know that the chairman asked a number of times about the recommendations that you're making and it seems that they're making some progress, which is great. I know the last time we talked, there was some concern that one of the problems was you make recommendations and the SBA administration would put them in place, but their staffs wouldn't execute on those recommendations. Have you seen that improve? Is that still going on? Is it getting worse? What are you seeing?
And I'm actually happy for that question because I wanted to clarify something. What I needed to clarify in this regard is that these things normally take time to happen in earnest. So somebody conducting a loan review, and what my folks brought me up to speed on was this: it's not every person conducting a review that didn't follow what is currently in place, right? We're finding that in some instances it happens, in other instances it doesn't. And I believe, though, we may find that in just about every program or in every industry, that sometimes what's in place isn't followed.
Inspector.
So
yeah, you just open up a whole new can of worms there. So do we have people that are doing a good job and adhering to the recommendations, and now we have other people that aren't? Have you identified those other people yet, so we can point to them and say these people have to either shape up or ship out? I mean, we've got some bad apples in the barrel. We need to get rid of them.
Mr. Ware, time has expired, but I will let you answer the question.
Thanks. Mr. Lutemeyer, I don't believe it's a bad apple situation, right? I believe that it is in terms of expertise, it's in terms of training, and is in terms of having people know exactly what people need to do to the T. I don't believe that someone we have not found where someone is willfully doing a poor job in terms of loan review. So I wouldn't want to categorize it in that way. And we have work coming out on that will be coming to you very, very shortly.
Well, when you have 40% of the program that's being fraudulently active, we got a problem, sir. Thank you.
Time has expired. And now we recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Newman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member. This is a great discussion today. Thank you, Mr. Ware, for being here, and thank you for executing this very daunting task. It does not fall short on us that this is a complicated action that involves actions that took place 2 and 3 years ago. So this forensic task force has really been helpful, but realizing that it's tough. So I want to make one comment and clarify something, because I just want to clarify with you. You are investigating potential fraud, and those numbers are relative to potential fraud, not proven fraud, correct?
So in terms of, investigations and audits, two different things clearly.
Yeah.
So in terms of our audit findings, those were potential fraud. Good. Which we have not reviewed or completed our review on the entire package yet, large package, to determine what is the actual fraud. We do know anecdotally that what we have called potential fraud is very likely fraud, because our fraud cases and criminal convictions and indictments speak directly to the patterns that we document as potential fraud.
Thank you for clarifying. So I have 3 areas of question. I hope we can get it in the 5. Tell me a little bit about this right-sizing project. I really like this idea. I've done this in business before, so I really like the agile product model. Can you just share a little bit about what's in that product kit? Right.
In the toolkit is a way for you to identify and focus on a single question or to notify management and leadership of serious, crucial problems that they need to take action on immediately. So in the case of IDLE, for example, once we started to see the trends, we got to the table with the leadership team here while the team was working on putting together something for public consumption, and told them, listen, you need to put a stop to this right now. You need to set up a system of control that can identify these duplicate IP addresses and these bad emails and these things that fall in like 3-4 buckets. It needs to be addressed right now. And we try to get that. So the information is immediate. And then the public sees the entire thing that they could respond to within 30 to 60 days.
Thank you. That sounds like it's working in real time, which is what we want right now. We don't want to lose any more time. Couple of other areas. One is data integrity. In our visit, it was probably in first quarter, it was clear that there were some data integrity issues. Can you share with the committee here what has been done in the last 3 quarters to address the data integrity issues?
Right. So what we have found in working with them, initially, of course, the deluge of things that came in completely broke that system, right? So since that time, they brought in a third-party contractor that has done a great job in terms of cleaning up the data. And as you know, they put out monthly, they put out the stats, they put out these things. This data has been fixed tremendously. There are some, I think there's one field, if I'm trying to remember, that has to do with congressional data that we are looking at right now. So we're in the process of determining just how clean it is.
Good. And I'll look forward to that report. And then finally, which of all of the loan programs did you find the least potential fraud, and why was that? Why do you think that fared the best?
Right. So the least potential fraud, of course, was found in the Paycheck Protection program. And I believe one of the reasons was because most of the lenders knew their customers. Yeah. So they were able to ask the right questions off the bat and to put a stop to it prior to funds being disbursed. We were able to, we got like within the first week or so, like 5,000 contacts from banks where we knew there was a problem. And they were being able to hold, and they've been a great partner with us in terms of having the funds seized and returned to the government.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for your great work on this. And I'll say again, thank you for going back forensically to 2 or 3 years prior to this and solving some of the issues that arose at that time. So appreciate your work.
Gentle lady's time has expired, and now we recognize Mr. Williams, the vice-ranking member of the committee from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and Ranking Member Lukemeyer. And I'm just listening to this already as a small business owner. It's amazing to me how this committee and this agency is so political, and the Main Street small business owner is getting squeezed right in the middle. This is going to have to change. Now, Mr. Ware, your report found massive fraud in almost every one of the SBA COVID relief programs. Within the EIDL program we've talked about this morning alone, there's been nearly $80 billion in fraudulent activity. This leads to us question the ability of the SBA to carry out or set up new programs in the future if they're unable to properly account for taxpayer dollars when Main Street businesses need it most and have earned it. The SBA demonstrated their inability to discharge emergency lending at every single turn. Yet my Democratic colleagues want to expand the SBA's lending authority and kind of reward bad behavior, even when the private sector has proven willing and better suited to take on these efforts. Private sector always does it better. And Mr. Ware, why should we expand direct lending authority for the SBA when evidence that you've talked about today has clearly proven they were unsuccessful in properly executing their duties and combating fraud in COVID relief programs?
So Williams, thank you very much for that question. The question as to why should you do that is really a policy and program question that the IG is prohibited by law from responding to. I could tell you what our body of work talks about in terms of an internal control structure, and that a proper internal control structure, regardless of which way this Congress or the administration determines to go from a policy perspective, is what is most critical in my eyes.
Okay. During the pandemic, various federal agencies were tasked with getting money to the American people as fast as possible. Now, unfortunately, the SBA seemed to be one of the worst at distributing business saving funds for the last 2 years. The Shuttered Venues Operator Grant Program, SVOG, the SVOG program, which was created from my bipartisan Save Our Stages Act, took over 6 months from being signed into law before a single dollar was dispersed. Cinemas, theaters, concert halls, and other entertainment venues across the country struggled to stay in business, where they were left in the dark by the SBA Administrator Guzman, who has still not been held to account for these catastrophic failures. People lost jobs. Futures were torn apart. So, Mr. Ware, based on their fundamentally unprepared to perform their duties, is it your opinion that the SBA setbacks are indicative of greater organizational challenges, or was it basic incompetence and lack of leadership that caused these embarrassing rollouts of events and life-changing events for small business owners? That's a pretty simple question.
Well, I mean, again, I go back simply to the work that we've done. And we put out a management alert on the controlled environment and tracking performance results in that program, the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program, right? And in terms of the risk framework that we asked them to put in place, the clearly defined performance goals, we know that they put those items in place relative to the rollout of it and what happened and who is to blame and everything like that for the delay. We have not looked into that. We have another report on SVOG that should be out shortly.
Well, I look forward
Hopefully.
to seeing that, but you ought to look into it and see who's responsible for delaying this to these businesses that cost so many jobs. So the SBA is tasked with assisting small businesses across the country. I'm a small business owner. However, they fail to properly communicate with businesses, borrowers, and lenders and members of this committee during important times of need. So when the SBA system disruptions halted the SVOG program in the spring of 2021, businesses were unable to reach anyone at the SBA to get a status update on their applications. And I mean, you couldn't get anybody. So meanwhile, members of this committee, such as myself, were being stonewalled and didn't receive the answers to our pressing letters until October, when our concerns were really pressing. As members of this committee, we are charged with overseeing the SBA, and I find this lack of communication troubling. So, Mr. Ware, do you have any information or data on the SBA's lack of communication with borrowers, lenders, or members of this committee? We are customers too, and you have to take care of your customers. So if not, would your office commit to looking into the efficiency and the effectiveness of SBA's communication with stakeholders?
Yeah, well, definitely anything that is a concern to this committee is taken seriously as a concern by my office. And if there is a request that you'd like to put forward for us to look into that, we can.
Yeah, I just did.
The gentleman's time has expired. Now we recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Ware, I'm so glad to hear that your office will continue to audit the PPP program and take a focus on fraud in the loan forgiveness process. As you know, in order to qualify for total loan forgiveness, the employers had to expend at least 60% of their PPP proceeds on payroll. Well, I've heard from labor unions representing hospitality workers in Southern California who have made very concerning allegations of several major hotels in the area, including JW Marriott and the Chateau Marmont. Their members experienced widespread layoffs at the start of the pandemic, yet the employers still received millions in PPP loans and have applied for forgiveness. It's unclear how they could have met the payroll requirements for the loan after laying off nearly all of their workers. So they've submitted complaints to OIG, but they have not been contacted yet. So can you talk about the office's process for responding to complaints regarding PPP forgiveness? And with tens of thousands of complaints coming in, will your office need assistance to investigate these claims in a timely manner? Also, let me ask this. I mean, in the hospitality business, the allegations are made of larger employers who received loans worth millions of dollars. So are you planning to establish a dollar threshold over which loan forgiveness recipients will receive more scrutiny?
Thank you. So there's a lot to unpack there. Let me start with our hotline process and what we're dealing with. You are correct. There's tens of thousands is constantly coming in. Here's what we have done. Clearly, my office, we tried just about everything up front in terms of dealing with all the hotline complaints, including reassigning staff, including we got help from 10 different IG offices in terms of processing. What we've done now is we've moved to more of a data driven model in concert with the PRAC. And the PRAC and my office developed a system by which we could take this in and categorize them and do some triaging so that we could get these things out to the field. Actually got a public award for innovation for putting that together, and we're still working on it. As a matter of fact, it is my hope that if I was to be in front of you in 30 days, that I would tell you that there is no backlog, that everything has been addressed. That's how aggressively we're moving on it. So, but that lends itself to a different issue, right? The issue is that I have a finite amount of staff, investigative staff that we've staffed up. We're about at 180. And my criminal investigators are carrying huge workloads. That's why we're partnering across the entire law enforcement landscape. So the process in terms of getting back to someone on like the hotel or the people that you spoke about, right? For us is an acknowledgement that we received it, but we don't provide updates, case updates to complaints. So that's the process, and maybe why they would know that. I hope I touched everything. Have I? What did I miss?
Oh, I also asked about thresholds and how are you ensuring that the larger transgressors are being addressed?
So as you're aware, all our criminal investigations are run through the Department of Justice, and AUSA is across the nation. These offices set the thresholds for our community. So, but we're doing, listen, the focus right now really is on the big ones, the ones that were the rings and everything like that. So you might see some that pop up because we have been providing, I think monthly, I hope, monthly, we've been providing you an update with the convictions, the cases and everything like that. You might see some that have a smaller dollar amount. You see others with large dollar amounts. The small ones would spill into what we're looking at in terms of a ring. There are natural outpourings of that.
The gentle lady's time has expired. And now we recognize the ranking member in the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access, Mr. Muser from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairwoman very much, and I thank our ranking member and Mr. Ware. Appreciate you being here as well. It is unfortunate, as this is an oversight hearing, that the United States Treasury Department has oversight of PPP, as you well know, and Secretary Yellen has been requested, along with by law, required to appear before this committee twice on an annual basis, and yet has yet to appear. Do you have conversations with Secretary Yellen? Can you inform her, perhaps for us, since she's ignoring our requests, to appear before this committee and answer some of these important oversight questions, Mr. Ware?
No, I don't. My oversight is within the Small Business Administration. Okay. And I meet regularly, like every other week, with the administrator here.
Well, PPPs obviously falls within your wheelhouse as well. So perhaps her insight and answers would be helpful to you as well as this committee. So let me continue along related to the EIDL disaster loan program. Perhaps appropriately named, unfortunately. The thing is that, look, I mean, there was $80 billion in fraud out of $260 billion in loans. I mean, that's a really outrageous figure here, as well as to taxpayers. PPP, as you offered and stated honestly, was far more effective and successful. $900 billion in loans with $4.6 billion in potential fraud. So a far better ratio for legitimate loans. And as you mentioned, Mr. Ware, it's due to the partnership with the private sector. So why would why would it would be considered to expand the SBA sole lending vehicles by members of our colleagues on this committee, or even your office? Would that be something that you would advocate for, expanding lending vehicles solely through the SBA resources as opposed to advocating for such lending vehicles to be expanded via the partnership of the community banks, such as the PPP loan was handled? Which would you prefer?
In my role, I do not advocate one way or the next, right? I rely solely on the work that is done by my office to make to inform this Congress and the people who would set up policies and the people who would set up programs on what you have before you. There are a lot of moving parts in order to make a determination into that. Our focus has been on the fraud environment.
All right, well, you're in charge of it. We need your input on what would be most effectively carried out by the SBA. So please keep that in mind. Now, let me just ask you this as well regarding the ADA loans. Is it going to get better before it gets worse? Are you comfortable at this point with the loans being made? Have we put, as the ranking member Lukemeyer brought up, additional safeguards in place so this fraud does not continue?
I believe, and I think I've said on record, and I'll say it again here, I believe that SBA's programs have more integrity in them right now than they did at the onset. And I believe that, for example, the major fraud concern, right, was initially SBA was dependent on self-certification. There wasn't sufficient vetting of that information, even when information was clearly illogical. And that led to many of the problems that we found. I believe the use of I think it's a 4506T tax transcripts and the type of data that they're processing from the Internal Revenue Service, I think it addresses much of it. And I'll tell you, we are in the process of making a determination as to how that fraud landscape changed and what that meant in terms of savings to the American taxpayer.
All right, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. And now we recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the past, you have reported that many missions critical and senior positions at SBA are staffed by federal employees nearing retirement. How has the SBA been dealing with the alleviation of the workforce challenges? And can you please share with the committee the progress that has been made in this area?
Thank you for that question. This is one of them that I hate to have to say. I believe I'm gonna have to get back to you on that because I don't believe I have current work that informs it. But I do know that my people ask questions like this regularly. I know I have seen from the chief human officer here, Elias Hernandez, that they have put together some plans to address that. We have not reviewed those plans as yet.
I'll go to this question. Many small businesses in my district are interested in contracting with the government. Such contracts can help the businesses grow and expand. In recent years, the federal government has been successful in achieving the statutory goal of awarding 23% of all contracts, primarily to businesses. Can you tell us exactly how is that process proceeding?
The process of determining whether or not the mandate has been made in terms of the percentage?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, if you've over the past, at least since I got here and long before I got here in 2016, we have been going back and forth with the agency on how they actually calculate those percentages. and including how they run the numbers. They have been actually, the one change that they have made is they've been transparent to everyone in what goes into the denominator and what goes into the numerator and coming up with that percentage. So at least they're doing that. But it is within, remember that they're responsible for ensuring that all other government agencies are calculating the same way in terms of making their percentage. The improvement that they've made is that we all know how they do it.
I'd like to thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. You're back to balance my time.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Donalds, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, Mr. Ware, thanks so much for making yourself available to the committee on such an important topic and for all the work of you and your staff that you've been doing here. I was taking some in-depth time reviewing your written statement, and you identified several challenges for the SBA in financial year 22. Challenge one, the SBA's economic relief programs are susceptible to significant fraud risks and vulnerabilities. Challenge number two, inaccurate procurement data and eligibility concerns in small business contracting programs undermine the reliability of contracting goal achievements. Challenge number three, SBA faces significant challenges in IT investment, system development, and security controls. Challenge number four, SBA risk management and oversight practices need improvement to ensure the integrity of loan programs. Challenge number five, SBA's management and monitoring of 8A business development program needs improvement. Challenge six, identification of improper payments in SBA loan programs remains a challenge. Challenge number seven, the SBA's disaster assistance program must balance competing priorities to deliver prompt assistance and prevent fraud. And challenge number eight, the SBA needs robust grants management oversight. Mr. Ware, these challenges are significant for any lending institution, let alone the SBA. Based upon all this, does the SBA have, frankly, the necessary infrastructure and wherewithal and capacity to embark on direct business lending, considering all the challenges the agency still faces?
That's a good question. That our goal and the goal of all IGs, because all of us have to put out the top management challenges facing whatever agency or department that we are responsible for. In all this, I believe that the men and women of the Small Business Administration are up to the task. I do believe that there needs to be the type of systemic changes that we have detailed in this document put in place. And then I believe that the programs could run and we can have an assurance that there is more integrity in these programs. The thing is that I think it's probably better that I stop there. I do believe that the Small Business Administration has the capacity to be able to run the programs that they're charged with running.
Mr. Ware, what I will tell you is that could they run their existing programs? I believe it's a maybe. But in the world of lending, and I spent many years as a loan underwriter, in the world of lending, maybe is what costs your customers money. And with respect to the SBA, maybe is what's going to cost taxpayers money. I mean, I think the core question for the committee and frankly for the American people overall is that if the SBA has a track record with direct business lending that they've already had with the EIDL program, who's going to actually carry the losses when the SBA gets it wrong because of so many systemic challenges and they have in their infrastructure? Like, who bears the real burden of losses from the SBA if they don't have basic, underwriting capacity that's been outlined in your report?
You're asking me who bears it?
Yeah, who bears the responsibility? Who's going to bear the responsibility for dollars lost?
Well, for dollars lost, it's a taxpayer, right? But that's in all the programs. That's in direct lending program. That's in the 7A program because the agency pays the guarantee.
Well, and honestly, it's a statement, frankly, Mr. Ware, that I think we both knew, but I think it's important for all the members of the committee, no matter what side of the aisle that you're on, for us to understand that even though there are some good intentions that the members may want to have or want to see SBA engage in for the benefit of various businesses in our country, the reality is that the SBA is nowhere near capable from an institutional standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint, from a capacity standpoint to address those needs, especially considering the fact that what they already have on their books with respect to the EIDL program and the PPP program and the existing loans in the 7A program. There's a lot of work to be done over at the SBA. They're nowhere close. And to, in my view, radically change the mandate into direct lending would actually cause significantly more problems and exacerbate those problems. It will not fix them. And we'll be right back here having more hearings just like this one. I yield back. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Gentleman yields back. And now we recognize the gentle lady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for being here today and for your diligent work, Mr. Ware, to oversee SBA's unprecedented response to COVID and the COVID-19 pandemic. And I wanted to take my time and opportunity to ask for your insights on how we can possibly apply lessons that we've learned from the pandemic and the pandemic response to future disaster relief programs. Many small businesses in my community have also been seriously impacted by the damage that was recently caused by Hurricane Ida. In fact, my community is under a federal state of emergency. While some have bounced back quickly, others have been less fortunate, such as the Veterans Construction and Utility Services company that's located in Modena. Faced with damages to equipment on top of economic pressures from the pandemic, this veteran-owned and service-disabled small business opted to close its doors for good, informing my office that they simply did not have the capital to apply for an SBA loan, nor the capacity to take on another bill to pay, particularly without the possibility of forgiveness. Unfortunately, this situation is very common. According to FEMA, between 40 and 60% of small businesses never reopen their doors after a natural disaster like Ida. Something I heard time and again from small businesses in my community following the hurricane was, where is PPP for natural disasters? I agree. Why don't we have loan forgiveness like we did under PPP for small businesses impacted by these natural disasters that are increasingly more and more common? It's our responsibility to take the positive aspects of our SBA COVID assistance programs, making improvements where necessary to address lessons learned, and ensure that our small businesses have the support they need to recover from all disasters, whether they be related to public health or climate change. So with this context in mind, I'm interested in learning more from you about how we can appropriately balance the need that we've talked about here to get more money into the hands of small businesses quickly in an emergency, while understanding certainly that the prevention of fraud can require a much more deliberative and careful review. So my question, sir, to you is, has the SBA and has your organization and operation examined what the tipping point is between getting money to businesses in a timely manner while also sufficiently rooting out cases of fraud and abuse? So my specific question is, are you not just looking at cases and addressing whether they are fraud or not, but are you also trying to catalog what it is that we could be doing to be better at preventing this fraud and abuse to begin with, so that we can take the good of the PPP program and apply it to other uses?
Definitely. Thank you for your question. Please know that that is a major focus of my office. We have put out 18 different reports on the pandemic programs. From before the very first loan was issued on PPP, we issued a report addressing this very same thing. What needs to be done to balance speed and controls? How you need to communicate to folks so that everybody know what they're doing. It is a major part of what we're looking at. And I have sought to do this across government in my role on the PRAC. We are going to work on a document that tells the entire disaster story, and to make sure that the lessons that we learned this time around are there forever, so that we don't make the same type of mistakes again. So yes, it is a huge focus of my office and has been from the beginning.
And of those 18 reports, and I'm sure and counting that you're working on right now, are there any aspects of those reports that this Congress and its responsibility can be helpful in terms of changing, modifying PPP so that we could end up with a PPE disaster program?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we worked closely with Congress on one of the earlier reports on PPP, where legislation was put in place to address some of our findings. So this body has actually been on top of it in terms of making immediate changes that move pretty rapidly.
So I only have 40 seconds left of time, and I would really rather not ask my second question because I don't believe we'd have time for an answer. But with the very limited time I have left, I'm an entrepreneur, a small business person, large and mid-sized business person as well. And some of the most remarkable things that ever happen under duress, when a company's under duress or when an organization's under duress. And so we have experienced extreme duress in this country due to COVID, and the innovations that have resulted are things like the PPP program, which arguably and granted have definitely, we've seen some abuse, but we really should make sure that we're taking advantage of an innovation such as PPP, figuring out how to take advantage of the neural pathways that we've created between companies and their banking institutions and our SBA, and make sure that we're able to use those innovations for something like the stressors that happen in natural disasters as well. And with that, I yield back, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Gentlelady yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stover, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Luetkemeyer, for putting this hearing on. Thank you, Mr. Inspector General, for being here to ask and answer our important questions. So just what number of recommendations that you have made to the Biden administration's SBA in relation to fraud have yet to be closed out?
So the exact number of the recommendations I could get back to you really quickly on, but I do know.
Mr. Ware, has the agency explained why they have yet to be closed out to you?
Oh, no. So it's important for me to note this. The agency has moved rather expeditiously to close out the majority of the recommendations. There are not that many outstanding that has to do directly with what our systemic recommendations were. When you look at it, I believe we have, the numbers are coming back to me like 110 recommendations, but about 60, 70 of them had to do with the financial statement audit. So in terms of the systemic things to move PPP and idle and to deal with the shuttered venues program that we issued,
Mr. Ware,
they have just pretty much closed those out. There's only a few that are remaining. Most of them, the date hasn't come for when they're supposed to be closed.
Mr. Inspector General, because my time is limited, Mr. Inspector General, you mentioned that the SBA has either partially or totally disagreed with some of your recommendations. What procedure is in place that occurs if they don't support your recommendation? Do they remain open or what?
No. So here's what we have. It is both the agencies and my office's responsibility to get these closed out. So we have a process in place where we go to what we call the audit follow-up official to make a final determination. If the final determination is that, well, we flat out don't agree with you, I raise that with this committee as an item to determine whether or not you feel.
And I think, Mr. Ware, I think that some of those suggestions are going to be coming back to this committee. I am quite sure. One of the things that you had mentioned in your previous testimony today was, and this is almost a quote, that you do not advocate in one way or the other. Mr. Ware, we need you to advocate one way or the other, because when you look at $4.6 billion of fraud in the PPP and $84 billion in the EIDL loan, you see some deficiencies. The SBA needs some changing, and so we need you to advocate for those changes. $84 billion, and my guess is as you look into this further, you're going to see more fraud. And my colleague Byron Donalds from Florida asked you, who pays for this? It's the American taxpayer that pays for this. I understand in this town, millions and billions and now even trillions is thrown around like it's nothing. $84 billion, Mr. Ware, is exactly what we need you to find and hold these people accountable. So we need your advocacy. That's the priority that your mission statement says as Inspector General. To advocate for taxpayers. And lastly, because my time is limited, I just want to say in closing, I just want to express my deep concern about this fraud at the SBA. It should be troubling to everyone here that as families are struggling with inflation, higher energy bills, and a supply chain crisis, that their hard-earned tax dollars are not being stripped away to pay criminals for fraud. I completely, Mr. Ware, and I want you to understand this, I completely respect the work that you are doing to recover these taxpayer dollars. But it is beyond me that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle still are trying to ram through their Build Back Broke program to increase the funds at the SBA when we know they're not efficient right now. When the safeguards that you have recommended aren't even put in place by the SBA. So we need your advocacy in this. We need you to step up and help us. This committee has full oversight of the SBA, and we cannot allow career bureaucrats in the SBA to determine this. Because when we've done that, like the idle, $84 billion. That's what the B, $1 billion of taxpayer money. I can't explain that to my constituents in northern Minnesota. But I will tell them we're going to find that money and we're going to prosecute the fraud. We need your help, Mr. Ware. I'm asking you to be an advocate for the American taxpayer, and I yield back.
The gentle lady from Georgia, Ms. Bordeaux, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Velasquez and Ranking Member Lukemeyer for holding today's hearing. And thank you, Inspector General Ware, for joining us today and for your important work. Since taking office, I've been working to ensure small business owners in my district have access to the tools they need to apply for and receive loan forgiveness under the PPP program. Can you give us an update on the OIG's work to evaluate the PPP loan forgiveness activity? Sort of how involved have you been in this process? And of particular interest to me was that early on we noticed that there was disparity among different communities in my very diverse district in who was receiving that loan forgiveness and who was not. And so would ask that you talk to that particular issue as well, if you've looked at that.
Sure. Thank you for the question. We have 2 ongoing reviews right now on the loan forgiveness process. What I do know as of this month, probably a week ago or so, 94% of the loans have been fully or partially forgiven. The 2020 PPP loans that is less than 95% of the amount that the loan value for 2020 PPP has been forgiven, all or in part. I do know that. So that's okay. What I have so far. The work is in progress.
Okay, thank you. That should cover everybody pretty much. But so on that, so then moving on with this. So the other half of it, of course, is making sure that we are preventing fraud in the loan forgiveness piece. And can you speak to the work you're doing to prevent PPP forgiveness fraud, of course, without holding up forgiveness process for rule following business owners?
Right. So I think what I do know, in last year, about the middle of last year, that's when SBA changed the way that it was going to do the loan review process for forgiveness status, right? So they decided that they were going to prioritize more manual reviews that were based on fraud risk rather than the status of forgiveness. They've gone to more of they say a machine learning type environment where they're able to determine risk. Know this, getting forgiven doesn't mean that we can't review the loan afterward, or that we can't come after a fraudulent actor after. So we're still in the fight for that.
Okay, thank you. And you're going to be evaluating sounds like sort of a data-driven risk program to see if that's really effective. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. And then last of all, I know your office has been working on identifying, preventing fraud, across different programs. And can you provide some insight into why the agency is further along in addressing the PPP fraud issues as compared to the COVID EIDL issues?
Is the question, why were they further along?
Yes.
On maybe an answer it could be found. And so COVID EIDL was realigned internally in order to address it. They were realigned under the division within SBA that deals with the PPP lending. So it is more of a familiarity from the banks, the lending institution, private standpoint in terms of the systems that they have in place to address and to catch fraud and to catch things up front that allowed it to be better suited to deal with this attack by fraudsters that came the agency's way. And the lowering of guardrails in the EIDL program in order to focus specifically on speed at the time.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentle lady yields back, and now we recognize the gentle lady from California, Ms. Kim, ranking member on the Subcommittee on Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Workforce Development for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Valdez-Quez. And I would also like to thank our ranking member, Luca Meyer, for holding this very important hearing. Thank you, Mr. Ware, for being with us and taking time to testify about your findings and help shed light on some of the waste, fraud, and abuse issues taking place at the SBA. We all recognize that your work is indispensable in our efforts to safeguard taxpayer dollars and push the federal government to work more efficiently and effectively for our constituents and small businesses. A lot has been discussed regarding how SBA direct loans have been more susceptible to fraud than loans provided by private financial institutions. And I want to echo many of the same concerns raised by my colleagues on the fraud plaguing SBA's direct loan program. And I have to say that I'm very troubled that we are considering expanding SBA's direct loan programs without ensuring internal controls against fraud. And that is working properly before we do anything. So Mr. Ware, since the beginning of the pandemic, the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program has been riddled with fraud. And we all know this, and we've been talking about this. With fraudulent loans potentially topping $78.1 billion, this program calls into question the efficiency of the SBA in any direct lending endeavor. So has SBA leadership done all that it should to combat fraud in the direct lending programs that the administration has administered over the past year?
I would say yes. They've done a great deal, and there's so much that pop into my head. Remember, at the onset in the EIDL program, that's when we put out the management alert that was able to capture what type of fraud we were dealing with within the program. And yes, SBA did not move, leadership did not move at the time to as quickly as we would have liked it to stem the tide of that fraud. But since that time, they have implemented quite a bit of our recommendations. Some they even did in real time, like at the table, making the telephone call. One that comes to mind was stop people from changing the bank account information after the verification has already been conducted. That was one way that we stopped it almost immediately, that level of fraud. Addressing the duplicate IP addresses and everything like that. So a lot of controls have been put in place. That's the answer to the question.
My concern and my colleagues' concern regarding direct lending, given that the SBA has a checkered past in direct lending, wouldn't it seem to call into question whether the SBA has the capacity to undertake more direct lending authority such as originating loans directly through the 7A program without opening the door for more fraud?
What I would say is this, again, the work that I provided on the onset, right, was a completely different control environment. The reason that I said, and sorry to offend, that I don't advocate one way or the next, I think that any type of advocacy that comes from an inspector general is in terms of the evidence that I put before you that shows you what is going on in the programs.
Well, thank you for your response. I want to move on to another one of your findings regarding the SBA's failure to adopt effective IT systems. Your top management report said SBA was expected to complete work on revising the beta certified project scope and improving management areas by the end of 2021. Can you provide us with an update and tell us if SBA was successful in meeting that baseline reviews and completing the functionality of beta certified by the end of 2021, like the report said?
To tell you right now that from the information that I have before me currently, the system is basically where it is when we last spoke, but we are looking into it. Like you said, it was at the end. We're just at the beginning of 2022. So we're looking at it. My understanding is it still isn't working as promised, is that beta certified was supposed to be what delivered the woman-owned small business capability, and that the application is still in the program sustainment and production mode, in other words. So they hope to make a directional decision in the next 2 months. That's what I was told.
Well, thank you for your response. Looks like my time is up, so I'll yield back.
Gentle lady yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Phillips, Chairman, Subcommittee on Oversight, Investigations, and Regulations, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Greetings, Mr. Ware. Moments ago, one of my colleagues insinuated that Democrats seem to not care about the fraud and are reckless with investment in the SBA. I just want to remind everybody that I think we all agree. We're all here to provide oversight and ensure that there is no fraud, at least as much as we can. You know, every dollar that's lost to fraud and fraudsters is a dollar denied to the very small businesses that we are here to serve, and a source of understandable disgust by me and every American taxpayer. I just want to make that clear. And there's a lot of work to be done. We all know that. But I applaud OIG's dedication to providing oversight and to the SBA for its diligence in implementing a number of important IG recommendations in recent months. As chair of the Small Business Committee on Oversight and Investigation, along with Ranking Member Van Dyne, let me assure you, we are both committed to ensuring that OIG has the necessary resources to conduct proper oversight, period. And with just $50 million in support from Congress, the OIG recovered $4.2 billion in fiscal year 2021, which is an extraordinary return on investment. So, Mr. Ware, with that in mind, what more can Congress do to support OIG and your efforts to ensure that even more efficient and effective oversight and recovery efforts?
Thank you. And thank you for that. Let me first say that thank you to this committee for all the work that you've done with our office to make sure that we get you what you need. But I think like a reframing of the question might be, do we have enough resources for the oversight that we'll provide for the pandemic loans that's going to perform many years after the pandemic? So at present, like we demonstrated, we could provide more oversight with more resources. That's not a good argument, though. The current level of oversight that we have includes just over 180 positions. The problem is that our non-supplemental budget authority only provides for 125. And I said in my opening that the supplemental funds are going to be gone by the end of fiscal year 2024. So it's I think that it's bad timing in terms of that's going to be a key moment for realizing the true scope of fraud in these programs. Mm-hmm. But so I believe that the annual resource level, the ones that we get annual from OMB, and you know, I'm executive branch, I work with the Office of Management and Budget, and they work well with me. What I could ask the committee is to just please support what comes forward in terms of right sizing us to match the fraud landscape.
Okay, thank you, sir. And I encourage my colleagues to give that deep consideration when that request is made. As we all know, PPP was designed to expeditiously distribute funds, with much of the fraud and eligibility controls designed to occur not at loan initiation, rather during the loan forgiveness period. I know OIG has identified, I think it's 70,000 loans, roughly totaling $4.6 billion in potentially fraudulent PPP loans, and stated, quote, this might be the tip of the iceberg. So with a large majority of the PPP loans now being partially or fully forgiven, does OIG have a better sense of the extent of total PPP fraud? I don't remember if you gave a specific sense of that. And if not, when will you have a more distinct picture of fraud?
That work is ongoing. So the work on loan forgiveness, we have, I think that there's two that are ongoing currently, in which we should have at least some indication of what we're looking at. But I still think we're gonna see where the rubber meets the road on a lot of these that won't come back for loan forgiveness, because the numbers are large, right? Even if it's 5%, the numbers are still huge. So, and on those that may default early, because we have an early default high risk lending review program internally.
Okay, I with my minute left or so, we know there are a number of non-bank lenders that may have been particularly susceptible to processing fraudulent or ineligible loan applications. Is OIG working specifically to identify and investigate those lending institutions, the non-bank lenders?
Well, we have not focused on any over any. With the number that we're dealing with, we have enough from the entire landscape to select from. I mean, our agents have caseloads that are just unimaginable, quite frankly.
I imagine.
So.
Okay, well, with that in mind, my first question was, what resources do you need? I trust you won't be shy in asking us, because it is our responsibility to ensure you have the resources to provide the oversight that we expect and demand, and so do American taxpayers. So thank you again for your service, sir. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. General Ware, thanks for being here again. You can hear the level of frustration, I think, in some of the members' voices as they continue to ask the questions, and it's difficult, I think, in a 5-minute exchange to kind of get down to the nitty-gritty. But let me just ask you a couple of things here. In the fall of 2021 semi-annual report to Congress, you mentioned that the OIG had been working diligently with federal, state, and local law enforcement partners over the past year to bring more than 300 PPP or idle fraudsters to justice. The result has been, it's been reiterated numerous times today, is $460 million in assets recovered, not including the $3.1 billion that the OIG helped financial institutions recover. So I guess my question is, what's the measuring stick that you're using at this point to kind of gauge what you would consider success? You know, that those numbers, the way the math kind of shakes out is it's just a 3% recovery. But you know, what I'm wondering is, what is that goal that you guys have internally right now? And certainly, I'd love to hear updates on a regular basis given to the committee so that we know kind of where we're at and what's going on.
Regarding the updates, there is an update document sent to this committee that comes out, I believe, on a monthly basis. Is either monthly or quarterly? Yeah, it is monthly. Yeah, on a monthly basis that goes to this committee. Relative to a success measure and the numbers that you're using, you remember that the semi-annual report covers 6 months, right? So understand that as well. In terms of a measuring stick for success, success is the whole of government approach that we have taken to this from the onset. We're working with Department of Justice and with AUSAs across this country in order to pull this together. We're working with the FBI, the Secret Service. Our success is all of our successes. It's really the success of the American taxpayer in terms of how much fraudulent actors we will catch. I don't have a number like we need to catch X amount of people. What I do know is that we are diligently working on bringing fraudulent acts, fraudsters to justice in these programs.
Well, I think my concern is that as we go through this process now, and unfortunately, I mean, PPP and the EIDL program, you know, even though they've been great successes, they're tarnished now. And they're tarnished by this high fraudulent number. If there's some way for us to, moving forward, say this is where you might shutter a program, you may actually make a determination that it's no longer serving its purpose because of the high fraudulent number. I mean, I don't think that's out of the realm, and that appears to be something that's happened in the past related to some other SBA programs. So, I mean, from my perspective, I think that's something we should be aware of, we should be watching, and, you know, a year from now, you know, let's all get back together and see exactly where we're at. Because unfortunately, I think it might mean the end of some programs if it isn't characterized this way, or if there aren't specific hard deadlines on trying to meet some of those goals. And I think it would be in the best interest of obviously the SBA, but you know, your office kind of has the reins there, and you can make that happen. So I'm hoping that, you know, with these regular, and if you say it's monthly updates, I certainly will pay more attention to that, and I hope the communication is free flowing between the committee and your office.
Just one thing, Chairman, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. One of the things I forgot to mention that I think is very important for everyone here to understand is that white collar crime of this type normally takes years to manifest and to really come to really come forward. What we've done is we have expedited this on a way that really has not happened in the past. And so what we're seeing is just we're only still at the beginning of it, because the loan forgiveness process isn't even done yet. The idle loans haven't even come up for repayment yet. Mm-hmm. So that would be where the real rubber meets the road in terms of fraud cases and everything else. So let's understand that we're still at the very onset of our oversight.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentle lady from Kansas, Ms. Davis, Chairwoman, Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. And thank you, Mr. Ware, Inspector General Ware, for joining us today to report on the SBA's managerial and programmatic challenges. You know, as you mentioned in your testimony, the Paycheck Protection Program and the COVID EIDL program have unfortunately been susceptible to forms of fraud and abuse. And these programs have been especially vulnerable because of the broad scope and, as you mentioned, the rapid implementation during the very beginning of the pandemic. I am particularly concerned about the fraud in the COVID EIDL program involving identity theft, because it not only harms the taxpayers and real small business owners, but also innocent individuals who are not at all connected in that way. So, you know, in your OIG report 21-15, which was released in May, you examined the SBA's handling of identity theft in the EIDL program and raised concerns about the OIG's lack of administrative seizure authority. So I'm curious if the lack of seizure authority has impacted the case, you know, what you're seeing now and how that's impacted cases your office is able to pursue.
Great. So I would say that it probably, in terms of impact, it hasn't stopped anything, because we work very closely with the Secret Service. We have a great relationship with them to seize on our behalf, because they have obviously the seizure authority. Now, if we had it in this instance, I believe we'd be able to move a little bit faster, but that's it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And that was definitely something that that stuck out to me. And then I think I kind of want to switch over to ongoing liability. So you had mentioned many of the initial vulnerabilities of the program had been fixed. And I'm curious if you could speak to the ongoing liabilities in the Paycheck Protection Program and EIDL programs, and what further steps the SBA or even this committee need to take as we move forward. If you want to speak to that for a minute.
Could you help me to understand what do you mean specifically by ongoing liability?
I guess what I'm thinking about is, there were some guidance to financial institution issues that had occurred earlier on. And I'm curious if, whether or not there's ongoing liabilities. I think what I'm thinking about is the potential for, additional fraud and those kinds of things. As you said, when the rubber meets the road, is going to, those dates haven't come up yet. So I'm curious if you could talk to us a little bit about what is going on, or if there are any steps that we need to be taking.
So the whole landscape will be different because of closed programs, right? So it's the money at this point is already out. So we're dealing with looking at it from a loan forgiveness perspective, of which we have 2 ongoing reviews to inform that will inform us greatly on what that continuing risk is from that standpoint. The same will happen when the loans come up for repayment in COVID EIDL. So in terms of informing, that's the work that's ongoing currently. But it's kind of 2 different things. If you know what I mean, in terms of the money going out the door was where we were at before. The money's out the door already.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate your being here. I appreciate the work you guys are doing over there, and I will look forward to if there are any further issues that we're seeing. We will absolutely keep the line of communication open with your office.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Gentle lady yields back. Now we recognize the gentle lady from Texas, Ms. Van Dyne, Ranking Member, Subcommittee on Oversight, Investigations, and Regulations, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Velasquez and Ranking Member Lukemeyer, for holding this hearing today. And thank you, Inspector General Ware, for being here and for your continued oversight work. What your office does, especially over the last 2 years, has been invaluable. This was made clear by the $4.2 billion in recovered funds and savings from your oversight of SBA's pandemic response efforts last year. As we're all aware, the December CPI numbers just came out today, and they're even worse than expected once again. Gasoline is up 49.6%. Used car and trucks are up 37.3%. Rental cars and trucks are up 36%. Propane, kerosene, and firewood are up 33.8%. This is on the backs of working Americans and on small business employers. Many deserving applicants are being pushed out and being beat out by fraudulent applicants. So it is about $80 to $100 billion worth of fraudulent improper payments have been given out by the SBA. Theoretically, if the SBA was to return that fraudulently obtained money, could they then provide that money to other more deserving applicants?
That I'll need to get back to you on that one. There are some. That's a complicated question, quite frankly. And I believe that it has to go through Treasury, and then it would have to, there are some rules that need to be followed. I don't believe it's as easy as going back into the program and getting back out. But I would need to clarify that. I wouldn't want to give a wrong answer on the record.
I'd be interested in hearing the response on that, because if $100 billion was appropriated to be able to give out in this fund to those deserving applicants, and $100 billion was fraudulently given out, it seems to me that you'd be able to take that money that was fraudulently given out and be able to help those people who need it the most. That was the purpose. That was the appropriation of those dollars by Congress. So if you could get back with my office on that, I'd really appreciate it.
The only issue is that money is still potential, and we don't have our hands on the money to pull back yet.
I think that was part of my question, is if we were able to obtain those fraudulent funds. That was the assumption. It's clear that the amount of fraud is incredibly large. And the Secret Service's National Pandemic Fraud Recovery Coordinator was quoted saying he's never seen something at this scale. So considering, those kind of issues, what would you recommend this committee, or who would you recommend that this committee reach out to expedite getting these funds back and prevent further fraud from occurring?
To give which funds back?
The funds that have been handed out fraudulently.
Oh, that have been recovered?
That we have not yet recovered. How can we get those funds back and quickly? How can we expedite the recovery of those funds? Who would you recommend that this committee call and work with?
Well, I would believe that would be with the Department of Justice, but I do believe that the Department of Justice is working hand in hand with the law enforcement community, federal, state, and local, in that regard.
All right, so the financial institutions that have been involved with this process from the beginning, and they have been able to help return funds. So would it be beneficial for members of this committee to work collaboratively with these financial institutions, either by holding hearings or by other means?
So remember that you're talking about two different programs, right? One, a direct lending program that was done by SBA, and the other that was done by banks. And like so many have pointed out, where we found rampant fraud was in the direct lending program.
Okay.
So
I'm just wondering, do you think it would be beneficial for this committee to be able to work with financial institutions to identify how we could better the program and prevent fraud from happening in the future?
Yeah, that's a tough one for me, perhaps.
Okay. In your November 30th report, you highlighted that your review of a Treasury Department analysis revealed that SBA's lack of adequate pre-award controls during this period of review led to 75,180 COVID-19 idles, totaling over $3.1 billion and 117,135 emergency idle grants, totaling over $550 million being dispersed to potentially ineligible recipients. Has this lack of control been resolved?
Yes, it has. SBA immediately instituted the do not pay check, the do not pay check that is now automatic in their process.
Excellent. Mr. Ware, I appreciate your hard work you and your office continue to do. We've certainly given the members of this committee a lot to think about in terms of oversight. I hope the chairman of the Oversight, Investigations and Regulations Subcommittee, Mr. Phillips, agrees that we should be holding a hearing on the rampant fraud that we've seen in these programs, and that would be an excellent first step. Thank you very much. I yield.
Time has expired, and now we recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes. Mr. Carter, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Mr. Ware, thank you very much for your service. Staffing up for major disasters continue to be a top management performance challenge for SBA. The challenge has been even more evident with the current pandemic, and for me in Louisiana, insult to injury is the pandemic, as well as the natural disasters that we suffered with Hurricane Ida. When the agency was forced to hire more permanent and temporary staff than ever before, process millions of COVID idles, Mr. Ware, your office recommended the agency develop an after-action plan to assess how the agency staff performed during the pandemic so they can do better with the next disaster. To your knowledge, has the agency committed to conducting these assessments?
They have committed to conducting the assessment. We have not yet seen it.
So when do you anticipate them actually doing it, and what effort do you have to kind of make sure that this actually gets done?
I do anticipate. I believe that there was a date associated, a deadline for when they were supposed to do that. That deadline has not come up yet, I believe. I don't have the exact dates in front of me. certainly could get that to you. But the only way that recommendation would be resolved is with that document.
Will you provide any guidance for them on the best way to conduct this assessment, or do you plan to play any role in providing guidance?
That's the trick part of the job of an inspector general. I can't build it for them and then review it by law. So what I could do is provide the evidence based on the work that I've done up to that point that they could get from and deal with the recommendation from there.
Are there best practices that are out there that doesn't put you in a potential conflict, but that can provide some guidance on best practices on how this could be done?
And the best practices are what we can offer up. I don't recall if because I don't have that particular report in front of me where the recommendation came from, but it's just definitely something I could get back to you on more definitively. Okay. I don't want to speak above it and then have the auditors come after me.
That's fair. Are there lessons the agency can take from FEMA or other agencies on how to rapidly staff up better?
Yeah, I'm certain they could, but I also believe they have, because remember that the EIDL program isn't new, right? The EIDL program been around for forever. So they have consistently had this challenge. They know how to ramp up. The question is, the ramping up, are the folks trained? Are the folks properly vetted? And that's something that we continue to work with them to see that it's done.
As a part of your oversight, do you look for and determine if small and minority businesses, women-owned, disadvantaged women enterprises are having an opportunity to be a part of that ramp up? Oftentimes we have these ramp ups and we have companies or agencies that are big and by its nature have the ability to be ready for these kinds of opportunities. But because Small Business Administration, obviously, we have an interest in making sure that we're providing opportunities for small businesses, truly small businesses, to play a role. Any guidance or thoughts on, as you go through your oversight, to determine if in fact we're reaching those small businesses so they have an opportunity to partake in the aftermath of, in the case of pandemic or other natural disasters?
That's a good question. To date, I don't believe my office has performed or conducted any work in the area that's in alignment with your question, but it's certainly something that we could look at. I will talk with my team responsible for the disaster programs and get their thoughts on it.
That'd be very helpful, particularly as I mentioned in my jurisdiction, we have a plethora of small businesses that are in fact oftentimes on the side watching larger firms get the work, many of which are not in the jurisdiction that the natural disaster took place in. And obviously that's very difficult when we're trying to build a small business base and create opportunities for small and emerging businesses. So any assistance that you can give us in that area and provide some guidance and a resource would be greatly appreciated. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Garbarino, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and the Ranking Member, for having this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Ware, for being here. I have a question. So, and I know my colleagues brought it up before, and you mentioned the top challenges. There's a couple that SBA is facing in fiscal year 2022. And the first one on the list was SBA's economic relief programs are susceptible to significant fraud risks and vulnerabilities. You've seen the books, you've seen the inner workings of the SBA. And I know a couple of people have asked you already if you would advocate that they increase these programs. I'm not asking to say yes or no if they should, but is the SBA prepared to start new direct lending programs or increase the amount of money that they're lending before this challenge is addressed? Are they prepared? Now I'm asking you if they should or not. Are they prepared?
Right. Good question. I believe that SBA is more prepared now than they've ever been in terms of the control environment that is currently in place from a risk perspective. And that's why I look at it in my role from a risk perspective to the taxpayers' funds. So I believe that they have more, that their control environment is stronger now than it's ever been. And certainly much stronger than what there was at the onset of the pandemic.
So you're not saying, so for risk, you're saying that there still is risk of fraud, because I'm looking at your comments and you say your audits and investigations continue to find that the agency is facing significant risk of fraud because of the size and scope of its loan programs and related internal control environment. So that still currently exists, but they're still facing significant risk of fraud, but it's less risk of fraud than at the beginning when the program started?
Yes, let me clarify, because it's important for us to understand that fraudsters do what fraudsters are going to do. Fraudsters, there will be a risk of fraud to any program, right? Our role is to make sure that that risk of fraud is mitigated to the lowest level possible.
Is it as mitigated now as it could be? I mean, the reason I asked that, there are 110 open recommendations. Would there be less risk of fraud if those 110 open recommendations were taken into account?
Certainly. Important to understand that more than half of those have to do with the financial statement audit, which is dealing with something quite different.
No, I understand that. So yeah, I think you said 60 or so are part of it. So there's still 50 out there that could be addressed that would even further reduce the risk of fraud if they were addressed, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so
although not all of the 50 have to do with fraud.
No,
the ones that do, definitely.
There are some of them that out of these recommendations, there are some that would reduce the risk of fraud.
Yes.
Okay, so would you like to see those items addressed before any new programs start?
Certainly, I've advocated from the very beginning that certain controls need to be in place before any program is started. I said that before PPP was rolled out, right? Before COVID EIDL was rolled out, we had a report out imploring the agency to take a look at these things before kicking them off.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I do appreciate the work that your office has been doing on these reports. They are very, very thorough, and I agree. I would love to see the SBA address these risks of fraud, because I think any risk of fraud, and like you said, bad guys are going to do bad things. They're always going to find a way to do it. We need to stay on top of them to make sure that risk is as diminished as possible. I just don't think, based on what you said, and as you said, your advocacy is what you put in front of us with your reports. That's how you advocate. You're not going to take a position. I think that what your reports are saying is clear to every member on this committee, that before the SBA starts any new direct lending program or increases the amount of money that they do through current programs, they should listen to you and address those issues, those recommendations, because any risk of fraud of taxpayer dollars is unacceptable. Again, I appreciate the work you've been doing. Thank you for your testimony today. And I hope the SBA administrators listen to you, so less dollars, less taxpayer dollars go to fraud. And thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Tenney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and Chairwoman and Ranking Member Lukemeyer. I just want to say thank you, Mr. Ware, for taking your time for being here. And we're really grateful for your work and what you're doing and exposing some of the issues we've had with the Small Business Administration and how to improve it and make it more friendly to our business community. As a small business owner, we greatly appreciate that. And we know that they've struggled at times, and that's one of the reasons that I actually partnered with Senator Lee to introduce the Transparency in COVID-19 Expenditures Act. And only through the full audit of COVID-19 emergency programs can we really ensure that these mistakes aren't made again, and we appreciate your effort in trying to get these reports out. We do know that SBA has failed to respond to a lot of these policies that you've set forth in your reports, which are highlighting where we need to move them, and we, as my colleague Mr. Garbarino said, we want to make sure that we push them in the right direction. I want to specifically first get into an issue that I had with Administrator Guzman when she was here in November. And she said that she was unaware, and I tried every angle on this question to her, that SBA was illegally providing millions of dollars in Paycheck Protection Program loans to multiple Planned Parenthood affiliates, including a $10 million PPP loan for Planned Parenthood of Greater New York. And as you're aware, it's illegal for these federal funds to be used for abortion, and all applicants for PPP must abide by the rules and the size standards. And since Planned Parenthood has over 16,000 employees nationwide, they are ineligible. Have you provided information about the Paycheck Protection loans to Planned Parenthood, to Administrator Guzman? Is she aware of these as far as you know, or have you provided her with this information?
I have not personally provided information on Planned Parenthood to the administrator. I believe, I hope that the committee knows that we have kicked off a job that looks into eligibility of nonprofits that will deal with affiliation and size standards, and Planned Parenthood is a part of that. So we do have a body of work that's going on right now that addresses it. As a matter of fact, it came as a request, I believe, from the Senate, the Small Business Committee.
Right. So are you aware of loans that were made to Planned Parenthood?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And do you know if those loans were made, if that was Administrator Guzman was aware of that, and if those loans were forgiven?
No, I don't know either of the two right now off the cuff. Like I said, the work is ongoing.
Right.
When the team briefs me, I will know.
Does Administrator Guzman have access to this information, whether the top line numbers? Does she know? Does she have access to see this information anywhere as the rest of us would?
I can't say definitively that she does. I would guess so.
Would you recommend that SBA change any of its internal controls or anything to make sure that these types of loans, illegal loans that violate either constitutional provisions or the provisions of the PPP program, to ensure that SBA does not give these out in the future? That's something that I think that through your Inspector General role, you could do that as far as recommendations to the administrator.
I believe that recommendations will be forthcoming at the conclusion of our review.
Have there been any?
The review is ongoing.
Okay, if it's ongoing, have there been any preliminary information given to Administrator Guzman? So if she came in to testify next week, for example, she denied knowing of any of these, and as the administrator, I found that quite startling, but would she be aware of those now since it's an ongoing production of information?
I have not received an update myself from the audit staff as to where we are on this assignment. So I don't have something to provide to the administrator currently.
So nothing's uploaded on any website, or no information is in the public domain on this issue, other than what we know because there's been loans given and received on their 990 forms?
No, well,
or whatever their IRS forms are. I mean, it may not be a 990 form.
No, my work would never be uploaded before it is fully vetted and completed.
Okay. So none of that, so there's been nothing disclosed since November that she would know?
No. Okay. I haven't had any discussions with her. I meet with her every other week.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank you for that. Also, just wanted to reiterate the concerns that my colleague, Mr. Garbarino, had about the customer service issue. We still are receiving information about loans and other things that aren't being handled in an efficient and continuous manner. We hope that you will continue as the Inspector General to urge the administration to answer customer information complaints faster and more efficiently, as many people are out there waiting or haven't had loans processed for over a year. But again, I know my time is running out, but I appreciate your work in trying to get the correct information to the administration so SBA can work and function better for our communities and our small business community who are struggling through this pandemic. And I thank you, and my time's out, so I yield back my time. Thank you.
Gentlelady, time has expired, and thank you again, Mr. Ware, for being here today. Your oversight of SBA programs is very important, and it's more important now than ever as we work to address the challenges with the stimulus lending programs and learn valuable lessons for the future. It is vital that we address the systemic challenges at SBA and work together to ensure that internal controls are put in place. Doing so, we will make the agency stronger, nimbler, and better able to handle disasters in the future. To that end, it is encouraging to see SBA is heeding your advice and working to close out the outstanding recommendations. Most importantly, your work helps the committee track challenges all throughout the agency that need to be addressed. If we have learned anything over the last 2 years, it is that we need to have a well-functioning, funded, and staffed agency to address the day-to-day needs of small firms and be ready for any catastrophe facing our nation. I truly hope that today's hearings motivates all of us to work to find bipartisan solutions to bolster the agency. Without objection, members have 5 legislative days to submit statement as supporting materials for the record. And if there is no further business to come before the committee, without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.